I want to tell you something I've never said out loud to anyone except one person. And even then, I only got halfway through before he told me to stop because he could see it was killing me to keep going. 14 years. That's how long I was married. 14 years, and I walked out of a restaurant on a Thursday night without saying a single word. No argument. No dramatic speech. I just stood up, put my jacket on, and left. People who knew me back then would have said that wasn't like me. They would have been right, but I wasn't the same man anymore either. And that's the part of the story I want to tell. My wife and I met at a mutual friend's cookout when I was 29. She was laughing at something on the other side of the yard. Not performing, not trying to be noticed, just genuinely laughing, head tilted back, completely in the moment. I remember thinking, whoever she's with is a lucky person. Turned out she wasn't with anyone. By the end of that afternoon, I had her number. By the following spring, I had a ring picked out. We got married on a Saturday in October. Small ceremony, backyard of her parents' place, maybe 40 people. She wore this simple ivory dress and kept fixing my collar during the photos, because she said I looked like I'd dressed myself in the dark. I probably had. I remember being so nervous, my hands were shaking, and she held both of them and said, "Hey, it's just me." That settled me completely. That's the woman I married. For the first several years, we were a real team. I was a structural engineer. Long hours, occasional travel, the kind of job where you're proud of what you build, but nobody outside the industry really understands what you do. She was in pharmaceutical sales, which she was genuinely good at. Sharp, personable, excellent memory for details. She could walk into a room of doctors and have them eating out of her hand in 20 minutes. I always admired that. I'm more of a slow burn kind of person. She was quick, bright, lit up rooms. We bought a house in our mid-30s, fixed it up slowly, room by room. We talked about kids. We tried. It didn't happen as fast as we'd hoped. And then when it finally did, we lost it at 9 weeks. My wife didn't talk about it much afterward. I tried to bring it up a couple of times, gently because I knew she was hurting. She'd wave me off. I'm fine. I'm processing. I gave her space because I thought that's what she needed. What I didn't realize, and I'll be honest with you, this is the part that still sits with me, is that I gave her so much space that I stopped checking whether she'd come back from it. I just assumed she had. I assumed we were okay. We weren't. Around the time she got promoted to regional director, things started to shift in ways I couldn't quite name. She was busier, which made sense. She was traveling more, which made sense. She started caring a lot about things that hadn't mattered before, appearances mostly. What we drove, where we ate, what the house looked like to other people. I'd come home from a long day and find she'd rearranged furniture again, or replaced something that was perfectly functional with something that looked better. I didn't complain. I figured it was a phase. Maybe she was stressed and needed control over something. I signed up for a cooking class that fall. Something to do, something that might become a shared thing for us. I mentioned it to her once and she said, "That's cute," and went back to her laptop. I went anyway, alone, and I got pretty good at it. Made dinner most nights. She'd come home late, eat whatever I'd left in the oven, tell me it was good, and disappear into the home office. That was our life for about 8 months. Then came the texts. I wasn't snooping. Her phone was on the kitchen counter, and it buzzed while I was standing right there. And the preview showed a name I didn't recognize with a message that said, "Still thinking about what you said last night." I looked at it for a second, and then went back to what I was doing. I told myself it was a work contact. I told myself a lot of things. His name was Dex. I found that out a few weeks later when she mentioned him in passing. Her company's new national accounts guy, apparently some kind of rainmaker. She mentioned him the way you mentioned someone impressive. Dex thinks the Western region strategy is off. Dex knows everyone in the Chicago office. I started counting how many times his name came up in conversation. It was a lot. More than any coworker had ever come up before. I said something about it one Sunday morning. Casual, careful. I wasn't trying to start a fight. I said, "You mentioned this guy a lot. Should I be reading into that?" She looked at me like I'd said something embarrassing. "He's a colleague, Liam. Don't do this. Don't do this." That phrase does something to you after a while. It makes you second guess your own instincts. It makes you feel like noticing things as a character flaw. I asked her twice more over the next couple of months, in different ways, at different times. Each time she got colder. Each time the message was the same. "You're being insecure? You're projecting. This is beneath you." So I stopped asking. My friend Sean, we've known each other since college, started noticing things I hadn't even told him about. He'd come over sometimes for a game, or to help me with a project in the garage, and he'd see the dynamic. He told me once, sitting on my tailgate with 2 beers, "I don't know what's going on in your house, but something's off. You know that, right?" I knew that. What I didn't know yet was how off. Our company threw a dinner that March. Upscale place downtown, one of those restaurants where everything on the menu is described in 4 words and costs $40. It was for a big account they'd landed. Celebration dinner for the regional team. She invited me. I almost didn't go. I had a project deadline coming up, but she seemed like she wanted me there, which was rare enough that I noticed it. I got dressed up. Wore the sport coat she'd bought me for Christmas 2 years ago that I'd barely touched. We got there and she was immediately absorbed into the group. I didn't mind. I know how these work. I got a drink, introduced myself to people, made small talk. Harmless evening, I thought. Then I saw the way she was with him. Dex was exactly what I'd imagined. Tall, easy confidence. The kind of guy who fills a room without trying. But it wasn't him I was watching. It was her. The way she stood differently when she was near him. The way she laughed at things he said before he'd even finished the sentence. The way she touched his arm when she was emphasizing a point. Small things. The kind of things you do when you're comfortable with someone. The kind of things she used to do with me. I stayed quiet through dinner. I was processing. I wasn't ready to say anything because I didn't trust what would come out of my mouth. After dinner, a group of us moved to the bar area. My wife was across the room with Dex and 2 others, and at some point the 2 others drifted away and it was just the 2 of them by the window. I watched her lean in to say something, and I watched him smile in a way that made my stomach turn over. I walked over. She saw me coming and her expression changed. Not guilty exactly, more like annoyed. Annoyed that I'd interrupted something. She made a quick introduction. "Liam, this is Dex. Dex, my husband." Dex shook my hand. Perfectly pleasant. No reason to dislike the man on the surface. I made conversation for about 3 minutes and then said, "Can I talk to you for a second?" to my wife. She said, "Now?" I said, "Yeah, now." She excused herself in this slow, deliberate way that made clear to everyone watching that she wasn't happy about the interruption. We stepped away from the group toward the hallway near the restrooms, and I said quietly, "What's going on between you and Dex?" She looked at me for a long moment. And then she said, "I think you need to decide what kind of husband you want to be." I wasn't sure I'd heard her right. "What?" "I mean it. You can either trust me and be present tonight, or you can go home. But I'm not doing this here." "You're not doing this here," I repeated. "Liam," her voice dropped, "I need you to make a choice right now. Either you're in or you're out. But I am not leaving this dinner because you're feeling insecure." She wasn't whispering anymore. She wasn't shouting either, but she wasn't whispering. 2 of her colleagues had drifted close enough that I could tell they'd heard at least part of it. I could see it on their faces. That careful, neutral expression people wear when they've witnessed something they didn't mean to witness. Everyone was watching. Not obviously, but they were watching. Here's the thing about that moment. Everything in me, every version of myself from the last 14 years, wanted to smooth it over. Wanted to say, "You're right. I'm sorry. Let's just enjoy the evening." That's what I'd always done. Found the path that reduced friction. Told myself that keeping the peace was the same as keeping the marriage. But standing there in that hallway, in my Christmas sport coat, with her colleagues glancing sideways at me, I realized something very clearly. There was no version of staying in that room tonight that didn't cost me something I couldn't get back. I didn't argue. I didn't lower my voice and try to negotiate. I didn't ask her to reconsider. I said, "Okay." She blinked. "Okay, what?" "Okay, I'm out." I went back to the table and picked up my jacket from the chair. I said goodnight to the 2 people nearest me, genuinely, pleasantly, like I was just heading home early after a nice evening. Then I walked to the door and I left. I sat in my car in the parking garage for a while, not crying, not angry in the hot, explosive way, more like quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after something clarifies. I drove home, made a cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours just thinking. I thought about the miscarriage we never really talked through. I thought about the 8 months of reheated dinners eaten alone in the kitchen. I thought about the word insecure used as a weapon so many times it had started to feel like my actual diagnosis. I thought about a woman at a cookout, laughing with her whole body, and how long it had been since I'd seen her do that with me. She came home around midnight. I was still at the table. She walked in, set her purse down, and looked at me. "That was embarrassing," she said. "For who?" I asked. She didn't answer then. She went upstairs. The next morning, I called Sean before I called anyone else. I told him what had happened. He was quiet for a minute, and then he said, "What do you want to do?" Not what should you do. What do you want to do? I appreciated that distinction more than I could tell him. I told him I needed to talk to a lawyer. I won't pretend the next few months were easy. They weren't. Divorce is not easy, even when you're certain. There are logistics and paperwork and splitting of things you accumulated together, and moments where you're standing in a grocery store and can't remember which one of you liked the thing you're holding. There are nights where you're not sad exactly, but you're aware of a very large absence. My wife, my ex-wife now, she didn't ask me to reconsider. I half expected she might. She didn't. That told me something too. On the matter of the house, I did not move out. I want to be clear about that. We had joint ownership, and I had no intention of walking away from an asset we'd both built. I stayed in the house. She was the one who eventually found an apartment closer to her office. That was her choice, and she made it without much discussion, which, again, told me something. I gave her the better half of the furniture because I didn't care about furniture. I kept the tools, the kitchen equipment, and a painting she'd never liked that I'd always loved, a landscape from a small gallery we'd visited on a trip to Vermont in year 3 of our marriage. She'd said it was too somber. I thought it was honest. The divorce was finalized 8 months after that dinner. I'm not going to tell you that everything snapped back to normal quickly, because that's not how it works, and I don't think you'd believe me if I said it. Healing from 14 years takes time. You don't just move on, you move through. There's a difference. What I can tell you is that I kept cooking. I got better at it, actually. There's something grounding about feeding yourself well when everything else is uncertain. I started having Sean and a couple of other friends over on Sunday evenings. Nothing elaborate, some food, some conversation, a game on in the background sometimes. It became a thing. I looked forward to it. About a year after the divorce, someone in my Sunday group brought a woman named, and I know this sounds like something from a movie, but I'm telling you exactly how it happened. She brought her neighbor, a landscape architect named Jess, who'd just moved back to the area after a work stint abroad. Jess ate 3 helpings of the pasta I made and said it was the best she'd had outside of Italy. I told her that was a high bar, and she said, "I know. I meant it. We've been together 2 years now. Nothing dramatic, nothing like a story. Just someone who sees me clearly and says what she means." I think about that Thursday night sometimes. Not with bitterness. The bitterness burned off a while ago. More like with clarity. I think about how long I spent making myself smaller in that marriage, and how the moment I finally stopped, the moment I just said okay and walked out, was also the first moment in years that I felt like myself. My wife gave me a choice that night: stay or go. She thought she was cornering me. She thought I'd back down the way I always had. What she didn't realize is that she was handing me the door. I took it. I haven't looked back. I've thought a lot about what actually went wrong. Not just with Christine, not just with that dinner, but the whole 14 years. And the honest answer is that it didn't fall apart the night she told me to stay or go. It fell apart much earlier. In smaller moments I chose not to name. Every time I swallowed a question that deserved an answer, I was making a choice. Every time I handed her more space instead of asking if she'd come back from whatever grief she was carrying, I was making a choice. I told myself I was being patient, being respectful, being the kind of husband who didn't make everything about himself. But there's a difference between patience and erasure. And somewhere along the way, I'd started erasing myself and calling it love. That's the thing about slowly losing your self-respect. It doesn't feel dramatic. It feels like compromise. It feels like being the bigger person. It feels like you're doing the right thing right up until the moment you're standing in a restaurant hallway in your Christmas sport coat while your wife tells you to make a choice. And you realize you haven't actually made a real one in years. I don't blame Christine entirely. I think she was hurting in ways she didn't know how to say. And instead of reaching toward me, she reached toward something that felt like momentum. The new title, the new crowd, Dex. I understand that now. Understanding it doesn't change what happened. But it does mean I stopped carrying anger about it a long time ago. Anger is heavy, and it doesn't build anything. What I've come to believe, and this isn't something I read somewhere, it's something I lived into slowly. is that integrity isn't just about what you do in the big moments. It's about what you do in the quiet ones. It's whether you ask the question that makes things uncomfortable, whether you hold a boundary when there's no audience to see you do it, whether you tell the truth when lying by omission is so much easier. I failed at that for years, and when I finally stopped failing at it, when I finally just said, okay, I'm out, and meant it, it was the most integrity I'd shown in a long time. Sean asked me once, about a year after everything, whether I regretted not fighting harder for the marriage. I thought about it for a real minute before I answered. What I told him was, I think I fought too hard for too long for something that had already decided it didn't want me. The courage wasn't in staying. The courage wasn't in staying. The courage was in finally admitting what I already knew. That's what I'd want anyone to take from this. Not that you should walk out on hard things. Hard things are worth staying for. The right hard things. But you have to be honest enough with yourself to know the difference between a marriage going through something and a marriage that's already gone somewhere else and just hasn't told you yet. Intelligence isn't just knowing things. It's being willing to see clearly even when the truth is inconvenient. And resilience isn't about never getting knocked down. It's about getting up without letting the fall define you. I got up. I kept cooking. I let Sean sit on my tailgate and ask the right questions. I hung the painting she never liked in my living room, where I can see it every morning. That's enough. That's more than enough.